Zima's a unique alcohol beverage.
Only at Etoys. From Barbie.
Remember those brands from the 90s? The ones we grew up with that failed before we realized they were gone? These brands were part of everyday life, on our shelves, in our closets, and even shaped how we saw ourselves. What happened behind the scenes that made them disappear so quietly? Blockbuster Video was not just a store, it was the weekend plan. Friday nights meant neon lighting, rows of tapes, and the quiet excitement of choosing the right movie to keep the family entertained for hours. There was nothing quite like the feel of that plastic clamshell in your hand, or the thrill of spotting the just-returned cart before anyone else. But that world vanished fast. In the early 2000s, while Blockbuster executives were busy doubling down on late fees, a tiny upstart named Netflix was quietly mailing DVDs with no deadlines. By the time Blockbuster tried to play catch-up, streaming had already flipped the game. It was not just a business mistake, it was a cultural blind spot. Blockbuster had the chance to buy Netflix and passed. Imagine that. The very brand that had defined entertainment for a generation fell behind because it forgot to look ahead. There was something about the blue and yellow glow of a Blockbuster sign that made any town feel a little more alive. But in the end, it became a relic, frozen in time like the movies it once carried. And now, a whole generation will grow up never knowing the magic of wandering those aisles. America Online CDs were absolutely everywhere. Mailboxes, cereal boxes, even stuck inside magazines. They were impossible to escape. They promised a brand new future right at your fingertips with just a phone line and a bit of patience. And if you ever heard the dial-up tone, you already know it burned itself into your brain. America Online, or AOL, was the digital front porch of the 1990s. It gave millions their first email address, their first chat room crush, their first viral chain letter. And then, just like that, it started fading. Broadband showed up, and AOL's clunky all-in-one model could not keep up. The CDs kept coming for a while, but it was like shouting into a void. Eventually, they became a joke, something you'd turn into coasters or hang from your rearview mirror. AOL had built the bridge into the internet age, but it forgot to cross it. For a moment in time, though, it felt like the future was stamped onto every disk. Logging into AOL was not just about getting online, it was stepping into an entirely new world. And now, all that's left is the sound of 1,000 modems connecting. One last time. KB Toys was a staple of every shopping mall, tucked into a corner near the food court or next to the clothing stores you ignored as a kid. It was loud, packed to the ceiling with toys, and had just enough chaos to make your parents nervous. But for children in the 1990s, it was paradise. Unlike big box giants like Toys R Us, KB Toys felt scrappy and spontaneous. Every aisle had that treasure hunt energy. It was small enough to feel personal, but big enough to carry the latest action figures, Tamagotchis, and Nerf blasters. And then came the competition. Big retailers slashed prices. E-commerce started creeping in. KB's tight mall footprint became more of a curse than a charm. And when the economy stumbled in the early 2000s, so did the toy stores. They declared bankruptcy, came back, and then finally vanished altogether. For kids of that decade, KB Toys was not just a store. It was the main event after school or the grand prize for surviving a family outing. And when it disappeared, it took with it a little bit of magic. Toys still exist, sure, but they do not sit on a shelf calling your name the same way anymore. No fear. Apparel was the loudest, quiet confidence the 1990s had to offer. It was for kids who did not just play sports, they lived them. The brand was all over dirt bikes, snowboards, skateboards, anywhere speed met attitude. Their slogans were printed in bold block letters. Second place is the first loser. Fear is a choice. Every shirt felt like it came with its own soundtrack. But as powerful as the message was, the identity never expanded. The brand aged with its first fans and could not grow beyond the extreme sports bubble it had built. Fashion trends moved fast in the early 2000s. and suddenly, baggy graphic tees looked more tired than tough. It did not help that other streetwear brands started merging style with subculture better. No Fear got left behind. The irony is hard to ignore. The brand that told kids to conquer their fears fell to its own fear of evolving. But for those who wore it, it was not just clothing, it was armor. And even now, somewhere in a storage bin or a thrift store, that old shirt still stares back, daring the world to underestimate you again. JNCO jeans were absolutely wild. You did not wear JNCOs so much as announce them. With legs so wide you could lose a whole lunchbox in there, they were anti-fashion in the loudest way possible. But for a moment in the 1990s, they were everything. They represented rebellion, freedom, and a deep distrust of any adult who said, "You're going out in that?" From skaters to ravers, JNCOs were a badge of honor. They were like walking protest signs, against norms, against structure, against anything tight-fitting or preppy. The back pockets were the size of pillowcases, and the stitching often featured fire-breathing skulls or graffiti-style logos. You could spot a JNCO wearer from a block away, and that was the whole point. These jeans were never meant to blend in. They were made to stomp through conformity like a parade. The problem? They were built for a moment, not a movement. As fashion shifted to sleeker silhouettes, nobody wanted to be seen swimming in denim anymore. JNCO tried to relaunch, but the vibe was gone. You cannot manufacture a subculture that no longer exists. What made JNCO work was the chaos. And once the chaos calmed down, so did the desire to wear jeans big enough to parachute with. Still, for a few brief years, if your pants didn't drag across half the street, you were doing it wrong. Zima was not a drink, it was a statement. Clear, carbonated, and pretending to be cool, it was what you drank if beer felt too heavy and wine coolers felt too soft. Launched by Coors in the early 1990s, Zima was the original malternative. It promised sophistication and lightness, but mostly it confused people. Was it a soda? Was it alcohol? Was it water that made you weird? It came in a sleek, frosted bottle that practically screamed, "Drink me if you dare." Bars stocked it, teenagers bragged about sneaking it, and for a few months it felt like the edgy drink of choice. But the taste never landed. Too citrusy, too artificial, too indecisive. Zima could never decide what it wanted to be, and customers could feel that. You didn't drink Zima because you liked it. You drank it because you wanted to try something new, even if it fizzled fast. Zima had early success, riding high on curiosity and novelty, but that wave crashed hard. It became the butt of every joke. Even in its commercials, you could feel the brand trying too hard. And in a decade where image was everything, Zima's identity crisis was fatal. By the early 2000s, it quietly disappeared, only to be revived once or twice like a ghost at a reunion. But for a fleeting moment, cracking open a Zima felt like sipping from the future. It just turned out the future had better taste. Fubu meant something. For us, by us. It was not just a tagline, it was a cultural shift. Born from hip-hop and the raw energy of New York City, Fubu was style, identity, and defiance stitched into every piece of fabric. It was for the kids who had never seen themselves in fashion before. And suddenly, there they were, front and center. In the 1990s, everyone wore Fubu. Athletes, rappers, classmates, your cousin who swore he'd make it big. The logos were bold, the lettering was loud, and the message was even louder. Wearing Fubu meant you understood where it came from, and more importantly, who it was for. It was a direct response to being ignored by mainstream fashion for too long, and when LL Cool J dropped that unscripted Fubu shout-out in a Gap commercial, it became the stuff of legend. But then came overexposure. The brand expanded fast, too fast. Department stores flooded their shelves, and the brand's hard-earned authenticity began to blur. As the 2000s arrived, new streetwear labels stepped in, offering fresh voices and cleaner aesthetics. Fubu never truly disappeared, but it faded. For something built on cultural capital, losing relevance was a quiet kind of heartbreak. And still, for those who remember, putting on that Fubu jersey felt like stepping into your own spotlight. Delia's catalog was not just a fashion catalog, it was a lifeline. For teen girls in the 1990s, it arrived in the mailbox like a handwritten invitation to coolness. Chunky shoes, plaid skirts, glitter lip gloss, Delia's had it all. And it spoke in a language kids actually understood. Every page felt like a secret glimpse into a better version of yourself. The models looked like the girls you went to school with, just a little more polished, a little more confident. You did not just want the clothes, you wanted the life that came with them. And for a few dollars and a phone call, it felt almost possible. It was cheeky, clever, and full of attitude, way before that became the norm. Shopping malls were still dominant, but Delia's gave you something else, a sense of independence. You could browse from your bedroom, circle what you liked, and dream. But trends are cruel. As fast fashion chains took over and the internet made catalogs feel ancient, Delia's struggled to keep up. They opened brick-and-mortar stores, but the magic was in the mail. And without that charm, it lost its edge. The catalog stopped coming. And with it, a generation quietly said goodbye to the style guide of their adolescence. Kool-Aid Bursts were childhood in a bottle. You know the ones. Squeezable, loud-colored, with a twist top that never quite came off right. They were perfect for lunchboxes and summer days, even if your parents were always suspicious of what was actually in them. But kids did not care. It was sweet, it was fun, and it was yours. There was something magical about drinking straight from a bottle that looked like a science experiment. The flavors were wild, the colors even wilder, and somehow that made it taste better. You'd trade them on the playground like currency, and every sticky drop felt like summer vacation bottled up. In the 1990s, Kool-Aid Bursts were the party starter. But over time, the world got more health conscious. Sugar got demonized. Parents started reading labels. And suddenly, brightly dyed corn syrup with a splash of fruit flavor wasn't so welcome anymore. The brand kept tweaking the formula, but it never recaptured the old buzz. The squeeze bottle ended up as a curiosity, something you remembered, not something you bought. And just like that, the Kool-Aid man found fewer walls to crash through. Etoys.com was supposed to be the future. Imagine the magic of a toy store, available on your computer. No crowds, no checkout lines, no grumpy mall Santas. Just a few clicks and a box of joy on your doorstep. Launched in the late 1990s, Etoys was part of the first wave of dot-com dreams. For a while, it soared. Stock prices exploded. Investors cheered. It felt like we had solved Christmas. You didn't have to drag the kids through aisles. You could shop in your pajamas and still be a hero. The website was colorful, playful, and easy to use, back when most sites looked like spreadsheets. For parents trying to save time, it felt like a gift all its own. But dreams are fragile. When the dot-com bubble burst, Etoys was one of the first to collapse. It filed for bankruptcy in 2001, stunning a world that still believed the internet could do no wrong. The worst part? The idea itself was solid, it just came too early. If Etoys had waited 5 more years, it might be the Amazon of toys today. But timing, like toys, can be fickle. And what should have been a revolution became a cautionary tale. Tiger Electronics' R-Zone was supposed to be the future of portable gaming. Instead, it became the poster child for how not to make a console. Looking like a cross between a headlamp and a science fair project gone wrong, the R-Zone strapped over your head and projected red graphics onto a clear plastic screen in front of your eye. That sounds cool, until you actually tried using it. The screen was blurry. The games were clunky. It was uncomfortable, unplayable, and just plain weird. The graphics looked like something from a broken calculator. The controls were stiff, the gameplay repetitive, and most kids abandoned it after one weekend. You'd sit there with this visor on your face thinking, is this really what the future looks like? And unfortunately, the answer was yes, at least for that year. But back then, Tiger was still riding high off the success of its simple handheld LCD games. They thought lightning would strike twice. It didn't. Nintendo's Game Boy laughed in the rearview mirror while kids everywhere tried to act like the R-Zone didn't hurt their faces. It was a lesson in ambition outpacing ability, and once parents saw the price tag and heard the complaints, shelves cleared fast. Today, the R-Zone is remembered not for what it did, but for how confidently it failed. The Panasonic 3DO was a beast, high-powered, high-priced, and high on promises. Released in the early 1990s, it was supposed to crush the competition. Cutting-edge graphics, futuristic gameplay, and a name that sounded like it belonged in a James Cameron movie. But there was one massive problem: the price. It launched at around $700, which made parents everywhere do a double-take. For comparison, you could buy a Super Nintendo, a stack of games, and still have money left for pizza night. Sure, the 3DO looked amazing, but great tech without great games? That's a paperweight. It had horsepower, but no road to drive on. Developers were hesitant, and by the time titles started to arrive, most players had moved on. It was the console equivalent of a luxury car stuck in traffic. Flashy, but going nowhere fast. Developers were slow to support it. Marketing was a mess, and when Sony dropped the PlayStation shortly after, it was game over. Panasonic tried to salvage it, but the console world moved fast, and the 3DO stayed stuck in neutral. It is a reminder that being first does not always mean being best. Sometimes it just means being forgotten sooner. Orbit soda was one of the weirdest things to ever hit grocery store shelves. A clear, fruit-flavored drink with little floating balls inside, like lava lamp meets refreshment. It looked like something from a space station cafeteria. Naturally, kids were obsessed, adults were confused, and nobody could agree if it was genius or gross. Released by Clearly Canadian in the late 1990s, Orbits leaned hard into its futuristic look. You did not drink Orbits, you experienced it. The little balls inside would float, bounce, and hang in suspension like something out of a science textbook. It felt like drinking a toy, which made it great for kids and baffling for everyone else. Some swore it tasted amazing, others said it had the texture of regret. It was one of those rare products where the look overshadowed everything else. But the flavor? That was another story. Most people could not get past the strange texture. The gelatinous beads hovered in the liquid, giving every sip a bizarre chewiness. It was marketed as a soft drink, but honestly, it drank more like a science experiment. And when the novelty wore off, so did the sales. Stores quietly pulled it. Orbits became one of those, "Hey, remember that?" conversations people had in college dorms or Reddit threads. But for a second, it felt like the future came in a bottle. It just turns out the future was kind of hard to swallow. MSN Messenger service was how millions of friendships and awkward crushes began. Long before texts and DMs, there was the ping of a new message, the excitement of a clever screen name, the thrill of a status going from away to online. MSN was not just a chat tool, it was after-school social life. From BRB to LOL, it helped write the language of a generation. You planned entire evenings around when your crush might log on. That little ding sound could make your heart skip. Custom emoticons, colored fonts, and song lyrics in your status? That was your personal brand. Friendships grew, fell apart, and were rebuilt, all through that tiny chat window. It was messy and wonderful, and felt like a private world only you and your friends understood. But like many tech giants of the early 2000s, it failed to evolve. As smartphones and social networks took over, MSN Messenger stayed behind. It did not merge fast enough with mobile. It missed out on status updates, timelines, and the addictive loops of social validation. Eventually, Microsoft folded it into Skype, and then even Skype started fading. But those late nights chatting in secret, the emotional roller coaster of typing, deleting, typing again, that was MSN's magic. It made the digital world feel personal. And now, all that's left is the sound of a notification you'll never hear again. Tandy computers were Radio Shack's answer to the home computing revolution. And for a while, it looked like they might actually win. Their early machines were solid, affordable, and ahead of their time, especially the TRS series, which kids lovingly or not nicknamed the Trash 80. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Tandy had a real shot at shaping how families got online. But then things started changing. The branding never quite shook its clunky reputation. Schools used Tandy machines in classrooms, but by the time kids got home, they were dreaming about Apple. It lacked the sleek design and cool factor that newer companies were nailing. Even its software started to feel dated, like it belonged in a computer lab, not a bedroom. And when Radio Shack began shrinking, the writing was already on the wall. Apple got sleeker. Microsoft went mainstream. And suddenly, Tandy's beige boxes felt more like homework than innovation. Radio Shack stores, once proud to show off Tandy computers, began pushing batteries and remote controls instead. The brand slowly disappeared, and the once promising tech legacy vanished with it. Tandy could have been a household name like Dell or HP. Instead, it became one of the many stepping stones on the path to modern computing, one that just did not keep up. Eagle Computer had one of the most dramatic flameouts in early tech history. In the 1980s and early 1990s, they were building towards something big. Their computers were decent, their vision was strong, and on the very day the company was supposed to go public, tragedy struck. The CEO died in a car crash while driving a Corvette given to him to celebrate the company's IPO. It was shocking, heartbreaking, and symbolic of just how fragile tech dreams could be. The news sent a chill through the entire tech industry. Confidence in Eagle shattered overnight, even though their technology had potential. In a single moment, they went from rising star to cautionary tale. Nobody wanted to invest in a brand whose future had just crashed, literally. And the timing could not have been worse, just as the personal computer market was exploding. Investors panicked, confidence vanished, and Eagle never recovered. While not strictly a 1990s brand in origin, its collapse echoed into that decade as a cautionary tale. Eagle should have soared. Instead, it nosedived before most people even knew it existed. Some stories end with failure, others never really get a chance to begin. JNCO by Chevrolet was the car brand for people who wanted something small, reliable, and just a little bit different. Launched in the late 1980s but peaking in the 1990s, JNCO was made for young drivers and first-time buyers. It had names like Metro, Prism, and Tracker, vehicles that were light on flash but heavy on practicality. For a while, it worked. These cars were everywhere, especially in suburban high schools and starter homes. The styling was modest, the fuel economy solid, and the price tag was right for cash-strapped students. You were not buying a dream. You were buying your first taste of freedom. JNCO felt like a friendlier alternative to bigger brands, but it never pushed far enough to stand out. Its ad campaigns were bland, and the logo never became iconic. And in an industry where image is everything, that was a quiet kiss of death. But JNCO had a problem. It never fully committed to its own identity. It was marketed as a hip, independent alternative. But everyone knew it was really just a Chevrolet in disguise. Eventually, Chevy pulled the plug, folding JNCO back into the mother brand. It was like a band breaking up before they finished their first real tour. JNCO was never bad, it was just forgettable. And in the car world, that is the kiss of death. Gotcha Surfwear was loud, proud, and totally soaked in surf culture. It was the kind of brand that shouted, "Endless summer," even when it was snowing outside. In the 1990s, Gotcha was not just apparel, it was a lifestyle. With bold logos, neon color schemes, and that breezy West Coast vibe, it captured the imagination of teens everywhere. You did not need to surf. You just needed to look like you could. But fashion is a wave, and Gotcha caught one that eventually crashed. Bigger brands like Quicksilver and Billabong tightened their grip. Gotcha failed to evolve, and by the time trends shifted to streetwear and minimalist designs, the brand was left looking out of touch. It made a few comebacks, but none stuck. Now it is just a name printed on old beach towels and distant memories. Once a giant in youth fashion, Gotcha became a brand that just got lost. Big Dog Sportswear was one of the boldest things you could wear without saying a word. You saw it everywhere in the 1990s, Huge t-shirts with bigger-than-life slogans, usually paired with a cartoonishly confident bulldog. It was unapologetic, brash, and totally of its time. You were not just wearing a shirt, you were wearing a statement. If you can't run with the big dogs, stay on the porch. That kind of energy. But as fashion got sleeker and more ironic, Big Dog's shouty tone fell out of favor. The humor started to feel forced. The designs got stale. And what once felt empowering started to look like your uncle's old gym shirt. Big Dog never quite recovered. It still sells to a niche crowd, but the cultural grip is long gone. For a moment, though, being a big dog meant you had confidence to spare. Now it mostly means you remember the 1990s with a smirk. Merry-Go-Round Apparel was the kind of mall store where everything felt just a little bit too cool for you. Neon lights, loud music, clothes that made you feel like you were walking straight into a music video. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Merry-Go-Round was fashion's wild child. It was where you went to be noticed. But with great flash comes great risk. Trends changed. Shoppers grew up. And suddenly, the brand's loud aesthetic looked like it was trying too hard. The company expanded too fast, opened too many stores, and when the economy dipped, it crumbled. Bankruptcy hit hard in the mid-1990s, and just like that, a whole chain of teenage identity vanished. Merry-Go-Round was more than a store. It was a mood. And once that mood faded, there was nothing left to sell. Boku juice boxes were different. That was the whole point. In a world dominated by colorful kiddie drinks with cartoon mascots and wild flavors, Boku tried to be mature. It came in a sleek, simple box. No straws, no punchy slogans, no artificial flair. Instead of fun flavors, you got words like white grape and tangerine. Instead of wild packaging, you got calm gradients and lowercase letters. It whispered while everything else shouted, and that was exactly the appeal. Boku was the juice box for people who felt too old for juice boxes. It was marketed toward adults who wanted something easy, light, and not embarrassing to drink in public. You could pack one for work and still feel like you had your life together. For a while, it worked. Boku became a quiet hit, especially with Gen Xers who had aged out of Capri Sun but were not yet into cold-pressed green juice. But then, the world sped up. Health trends changed. Sugar content came under fire, and shelf space got tighter. Boku was too kid for adults and too adult for kids. It fell into a strange in-between that the market had no patience for. Brands like Naked, Odwalla, and later LaCroix began claiming that grown-up beverage lane, and Boku faded quietly into the background. No scandal, no outrage, just soft silence, exactly the way it had entered. Salon Selectives was once the name in drugstore glam. If you had a bottle of that pink shampoo in your bathroom in the 1990s, you knew what was up. It was not just about getting clean, it was about looking and smelling like you had just stepped out of a high-end salon. And Salon Selectives promised that at a fraction of the price. Those color-coded bottles lined every shower caddy and supermarket aisle. Red for volume, green for moisture, yellow for shine. Each formula felt like a secret weapon. For teens and adults alike, it made hair care feel just a little more special. But something shifted. As competitors stepped in, herbal essences with their wild scents, Pantene with the heavy ad spend, Salon Selectives started to lose ground. Then came the reformulations. Different packaging, different branding. The identity that made it a standout started to dissolve. Suddenly, it was just another bottle on a crowded shelf. By the time the early 2000s rolled in, the magic was gone. And it hurt a little, because this was not just any product. It was a part of your daily routine. A pink bottle you could trust. Salon Selectives still exists in a quieter, more diluted form. But that original version? The one that smelled like confidence and mall trips and movie nights? That one never came back. Pony sneakers had a pulse. They were athletic but raw, stripped down but stylish. If Nike was the prom king and Adidas the exchange student, Pony was the kid who snuck out during class and came back with a black eye and a better story. Founded in the 1970s but finding serious traction in the 1990s, Pony was New York to the core. Gritty, streetwise, and proud of it. Athletes wore them, rappers wore them, even a few movie stars slipped them into casual scenes. For kids growing up back then, Pony had that underground cool. The logo was clean. The look was sharp. They were cheaper than the big names, but they held their own. Then came the collapse. Bigger brands started swallowing up endorsement deals. Shoe design entered the tech race, where every new release promised better cushioning, arch support, spring-loaded soles. Pony could not keep up. They were scrappy, but scrappy doesn't sell when the market wants glossy. Attempts to relaunch the brand came and went, some with better results than others, but that 1990s-era Pony swagger never fully returned. Today, they are more of a trivia answer than a fashion statement, but for those who remember, slipping on a pair of ponies felt like choosing your own lane. You weren't just wearing sneakers, you were sending a message. Sports Illustrated for Kids gear line was supposed to be a slam dunk. The magazine was already a hit. Bright photos, big interviews, and fold-out posters that plastered bedroom walls everywhere. So why not take that energy and turn it into clothes? For a moment, it made perfect sense. Athletic wear was booming. Kids wanted to dress like their heroes. And here came Sports Illustrated for Kids with a full-blown apparel line. Branded shorts, caps, tracksuits, backpacks. It had name recognition and built-in nostalgia baked right in. But it never took off. Why? Because branding alone doesn't win over kids. The clothes felt like they were designed by people who never watched a full game. The styles were clunky. The fit was off. It did not have the street cred of Nike, the sleekness of Adidas, or the raw flair of Fubu. Parents might have liked the wholesome brand, but kids wanted something cooler, something louder. The gear sat on shelves, stores stopped stocking it, and within a few seasons, the line disappeared entirely. It is not that the clothes were bad, they were just forgettable. And in a market driven by personality and flair, being forgettable is a fatal flaw. For all its media success, the Sports Illustrated for Kids brand learned that being great on paper does not always translate to the locker room. Sharper Image was not a store. It was a vibe. You walked in and immediately felt like you had stepped into a future that barely needed you to participate. Massage chairs hummed quietly. Air purifiers lit up with sleek blue LEDs. Alarm clocks did 20 things at once, and you wanted all of them. In the 1990s, Sharper Image was the cool uncle of retail, a little weird, a little overpriced, but endlessly fascinating. You were not just buying gadgets. You were buying the dream that technology could make life smoother, cooler, more interesting. And for a while, it worked. The store became a mall staple, a default stop even if you didn't need anything. But the future caught up. Tech became less about novelty and more about integration. Smartphones replaced half the store's inventory. Amazon made it easier to shop. And suddenly, Sharper Image's core products felt unnecessary. The brand leaned too far into gimmicks and forgot about staying useful. Sales dropped. Stores closed. Bankruptcy came. Attempts to relaunch the brand never fully recaptured the magic. Sharper Image still exists online, technically, but it is not the same. That feeling of walking into a dark, air-conditioned showroom full of possibilities? That is gone. And with it, a piece of the 1990s dream of what the future could look like. Neon, chrome, and just a little ridiculous. When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. That slogan was everywhere in the 1980s. Television, magazines, even bumper stickers. E.F. Hutton was more than a brokerage firm. It was an institution. It promised wisdom, confidence, and a touch of elite mystery. Clients trusted it, but trust is a fragile thing. In the mid-1980s, E.F. Hutton was caught in a check kiting scandal that rocked the financial world. They were essentially writing fake checks to inflate their balance sheets. Not exactly the kind of leadership people want in their money managers. Fines were paid, leadership shuffled, but the damage was done. Clients fled. The name became a punchline. Eventually, E.F. Hutton was sold, rebranded, and swallowed up by other companies. The slogan disappeared, and with it, the aura of trust they had spent decades building. It is a sharp reminder. Even giants can trip on the smallest cracks. Plymouth was never the flashiest name on the road, but it was trusted, reliable, American. It was the car your uncle fixed up in the driveway, the station wagon that took families to the Grand Canyon, the compact that young drivers learned to parallel park with. In the 1970s, Plymouth had already seen better days, but there was still hope. Then the market shifted. Gas prices spiked, Japanese imports hit harder and faster than anyone expected, and Plymouth's offerings started to feel outdated. Chrysler focused its attention elsewhere. Dodge got the performance, Chrysler got the luxury, and Plymouth got what was left. People still bought them, but it felt like settling. You were not proud to drive a Plymouth. You were just glad it still ran. Sales dipped. Innovation stalled. Even iconic models like the Duster could not save the brand. The writing was on the wall. By the 1990s, Plymouth was a forgotten middle child, unloved and unnecessary. In 2001, Chrysler officially pulled the plug. For decades, Plymouth had been a quiet part of the American story. And now, it is a footnote. But the memories remain in faded photos, old commercials, and the sound of an engine that will not come back. Remember that place I said White Tower copied and got into some franchising issues with? Well, meet the very first to do it, White Castle. First founded in 1921 in Wichita, Kansas, by two men, Billy Ingram and Walter Anderson, White Castle was an innovator, and I don't think there was ever a more appropriate use of the word in this entire list. It was known as the first fast food hamburger chain in the United States, period. It also came up with small, square burgers instead of what we typically are used to, and these would later on be called sliders in today's day and age. White Castle wasn't just known for its White Castle-like architecture, which became a huge crux of its branding. It was also known for its really unique method of preparation. The burgers were made with onions and had holes in the patties, and this ensured that the patty was made evenly. The chain was one of the first fast food joints to have standardized food preparation and assembly line techniques, as well as an impeccable standard for hygiene. All in all, it was everything that fast food places today aren't, but a lot of places tried to follow its example back then because this place set the template of fast, convenient, clean, and easy food. White Castle became known for efficiency, simplicity, and a lot of good food. If you ever opened a kitchen cabinet in the 1980s, chances are you saw that familiar gleam, copper-bottomed Revere Ware pots stacked with pride. They were sturdy, shiny, and built like heirlooms. For generations, they symbolized real cooking. Parents used them to make Sunday gravy, holiday meals, and weeknight staples alike. The clatter of metal on stovetop was a part of the soundtrack of home. Ware's appeal was not just in durability, it was in the look. That warm copper shine made you feel like what you were making mattered. But by the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the shine began to dull, literally and figuratively. Non-stick cookware surged in popularity. Lighter, easier to clean, and often cheaper, it lured away the next generation of home cooks. And Revere Ware did not adapt fast enough. They tried rebranding, updating designs, even producing cheaper product lines. But with every shortcut, the brand lost a little more of what made it special. People noticed. The pots dented easier, the copper tarnished faster. Slowly but surely, families stopped handing them down. Today, Revere Ware still circulates online and in thrift shops, prized by collectors and nostalgia seekers. But in most kitchens, it has been replaced by sleek, ceramic-coated pans with trendy colors and digital thermometers. Revere Ware was about tradition, and tradition, it turns out, is hard to market. Woolco was supposed to be the next evolution of Woolworths. It had the size of a department store and the soul of a five and dime. Launched in the 1960s and booming into the 1970s, Woolco promised everything in one place: clothes, toys, appliances, groceries. For families used to making a dozen different stops, it felt like magic. A bright red sign that said you could get it all without going broke. But behind that promise was chaos. Poor inventory systems, outdated layouts, stores too big to manage and too cluttered to navigate. And then came the competition. Kmart, Target, Walmart, retail giants with cleaner shelves, sharper prices, and better supply chains. Woolco could not keep up. It became the store you only visited when you had to, the store where the lights buzzed too loud and the shelves were always half empty. By the 1980s, most Woolcos had either been shut down or sold off. Some were turned into malls, others just disappeared, and with them went a small piece of how we used to shop, wandering the aisles on Saturday mornings, dreaming about toys, picking out socks with mom. Woolco was not perfect, but it was familiar, and we miss it more than we admit. Lewis's Lunch in New Haven, Connecticut, was opened after the days of Antoine and Parker's findings, though it was still around when they were kicking. First touching American soil in 1895, this restaurant is special, even among this list of industry pioneers and innovators. Why is that so? Because, well, if a hamburger has helped you at any point in your life, and I know it's saved me on the worst days of mine, then we both have Lewis's Lunch to thank. The legend goes like this. The founder, Louis Lasson, made the first ever American hamburger when he had to put ground beef between two slices of bread to serve a customer in a big rush. And this caught on so well that it became the format for just about the next 2 centuries for American eating. I mean, I'm sure we'll still be eating hamburgers well into 2095. The simplicity of Louis' Lunch makes it a knockout with its loyal fan base, who know what they come for and pay to get and are perfectly content with the formula. A very, if it isn't broke, don't fix it kind of approach, but one that's worked well. Keeping ties strong with the loyal customer base you've built is as legitimate a strategy as expanding menus and trying out new experimental foods, and Louis' White Toast and Only Cheese hamburgers are an American classic that will never leave the history books. Sunburst clocks, brass peacocks, oversized metal sculptures of sailing ships. If it glittered and could be nailed to drywall, it was probably up there. Wall decor in the 1970s took the loudest ideas from mid-century modern and cranked them past 10. The Sunburst clock especially became the crown jewel of every living room, often mounted above a fireplace or a sagging plaid couch. It was supposed to say, sophisticated modern family. But what it actually said was, time stopped in 1973. These pieces aged fast. Dust built up in the corners. The faux gold finishes dulled. And eventually, people began to question why a clock needed 20 sharp metal rays stabbing out into their personal space. Like so many things from the 70s, it was a style built on boldness. And boldness is a hard thing to live with, especially when it came in shades of burnt orange and baby poop brown. At its peak, Rax Roast Beef wanted to be everything. A little Arby's, a little Wendy's, and a whole lot of, what exactly is going on here? They served roast beef sandwiches, salad bars, potato skins, even pizza. In the early 1980s, Rax looked like it had potential. The food was decent, the service fast, and the branding had just enough polish to seem like a contender. But then, something strange happened. The company started chasing trends without thinking them through. They launched oddball ad campaigns, like Mr. Delicious, a middle-aged cartoon spokesman whose entire brand was, well, being tired of life. Not exactly what you want selling your lunch. Customers were confused. So were franchise owners. The chain expanded too quickly, too unevenly, and into markets that did not make sense. Locations opened and closed in rapid succession. People started skipping Rax, not because they hated it, but because they could never quite figure out what it wanted to be. Was it fast food? A sit-down place? A salad bar chain? By the time they tried to pivot back to basics, it was too late. Competitors had passed them. Profits tanked. Most stores shuttered by the mid-1990s. A few scattered locations still exist today, but they serve more as novelties than serious restaurants. Rax could have carved out a niche. Instead, it carved itself into too many pieces. In the late 1970s, Vidal Sassoon was more than a brand. It was a movement. The salons, the products, the commercials. If you do not look good, we do not look good. It was bold, sharp, and full of promise. The Vidal Sassoon salons offered high-end haircuts with a modern edge. Women felt transformed. Men took notice. It was more than a trim. It was a lifestyle. You were not just getting a haircut. You were getting modernized, elevated, made new. For many, it was the first time they felt stylish instead of simply presentable. But like many trends, it struggled to evolve. The early 1980s brought new fashion rules, big hair, wild volume. Sassoon's geometric precision began to feel too rigid, too old. Franchises thinned. The elite vibe became a burden, not a benefit. Meanwhile, cheaper salons, home styling kits, and new celebrity stylists flooded the market. The salons faded. The products moved to drugstore shelves. And the name that once meant sophistication became just another bottle in the aisle. But there was a time, brief, electric, when getting your hair done at Vidal Sassoon felt like stepping into the future. And losing that future stung more than people admit. Right out of the humble neighborhoods of the Midwest, specifically Mankato, Minnesota, Happy Chef, which first debuted in 1963, became known for its classic American diner fare, which included a lot of recognizable breakfast dishes and burgers. It also took some notes out of McDonald's playbook, as each location had this really eye-catching statue of the restaurant's mascot, which was a smiling, well, happy chef. The statue would be holding a spoon and a menu board, and some of those statues even spoke to customers, making it really popular with children. At its peak, it was around 60 locations strong, and those were more or less primarily in Minnesota and the neighboring states, but what it aimed to do, it did well. It had a regional grip that competitors couldn't shake off, and that gave a lot of other restaurants down the road the idea of having strong fan bases with your local regional communities rather than trying to capture a nationwide audience. Polaroid was magic. You snapped a photo, waved the print in the air, and watched a memory appear right in front of your eyes. In the 1980s, it was revolutionary. Family trips, school dances, birthdays, everything looked better with that soft Polaroid fade. The camera itself was a symbol of fun. No waiting for film to be developed, no trips to the drugstore, just click, peel, and share. But technology moves fast, and nostalgia only gets you so far. By the time digital cameras arrived, Polaroid was already limping. The market shifted from film to files, and Polaroid could not keep up. They tried releasing digital instant hybrids, but it was too late. Their core business was built on something people no longer needed. Worse still, they held on to the old model for too long. Bankruptcy followed, and the brand was sold off in pieces. The name still exists today, slapped on novelty gadgets and retro-style reboots. But it is not the same. The soul is gone. The magic, that moment of watching a photo bloom in your hand, it belongs to another time. And maybe that is where it should stay. Parker's is the second oldest name on this list by far. I mean, compared to the rest of the names on here, this is certifiably ancient. It was made in 1855 inside the Omni Parker House Hotel in Boston, which on its own is a pretty recognizable part of American history. It's one of America's oldest operating hotel restaurants, and the fact that it survived literally a century and more to tell its tale should let you know how successful this place really was. It was even the birthplace of some iconic regional foods, like the Boston cream pie, which was a deliciously rich pie with a unique cream, filling you couldn't get anywhere else. To top that off, it had its own dish with its namesake that caught the wallets and eyes of people everywhere, which was the Parker House roll. It became extremely beloved in New England, becoming a huge part of the cuisine there, and even presidents were known to have visited the Omni Parker House Hotel just for a taste of Parker's restaurant. It blended in American menu items with French influences, something that, at the time, nobody else was doing. It makes sense that presidents visited this place, since a lot of them, like Charles Dickens and John F. Kennedy, who were regular patrons, were big fans of French cuisine too. Clark Equipment Company once helped build America. Its construction vehicles, forklifts, and loaders were staples on job sites across the country. From highways to factories, if something big was being built, Clark was likely there. The brand stood for toughness and reliability. But the 1970s brought headwinds. Inflation climbed, industrial jobs declined, foreign competitors offered cheaper alternatives, and Clark, heavy with overhead and tradition, struggled to pivot. Its innovation slowed, its market share shrank. Machines once seen as symbols of progress started to look like dinosaurs. You could still find them in use, but fewer every year. Workers were laid off. Plants closed. By the 1980s, it was a name people remembered, not one they relied on. Pieces of the company were sold, reorganized, absorbed. What remained was a fragmented legacy. Ask a retired construction worker or a union foreman from the era, and they will nod. They will remember the green machines, the noise, the muscle. Clark Equipment Company did not just lose customers, it lost relevance. And in the business of building, that is the one thing you cannot rebuild. In the 1980s, bringing your own lunch to school meant one thing. You had an Aladdin thermos. It was not just a container, it was a badge of honor. You opened your metal lunchbox, flipped that tiny red cup off the top of your thermos, and suddenly you were the main character of lunchtime. Aladdin made everything from licensed cartoon lunchboxes to vacuum-sealed beverage flasks that could survive a drop from a locker. Kids had Scooby-Doo, Star Wars, Care Bears, and every other pop culture icon plastered across their sandwich keepers. Parents loved them too, durable, affordable, and just commercial enough to keep the kids happy. But then came the slow fade. School cafeterias began offering more hot lunch options. Plastic containers with built-in ice packs started replacing metal boxes. Brands like Rubbermaid and Thermos rolled out slicker, modular designs. Aladdin tried to keep up, but their identity was too tied to a specific era. The metal designs felt bulky. The licensed characters got more expensive to maintain. And suddenly, the thermos that made you cool looked kind of dated. Aladdin still exists in some form, mostly through generic travel mugs and water bottles. But the magic is gone. For kids of the 1980s, Aladdin was part of a morning ritual, packed with care and excitement. Now it is mostly found in antique stores and memory boxes. Reminder of peanut butter sandwiches, thermos soup, and a time when lunch came with a little more personality. W.T. Grant was not just a department store, it was a part of the American landscape. In the 1970s, it had over 1,000 locations, main streets, suburban malls, strip centers. W.T. Grant was everywhere. It sold clothes, appliances, hardware, school supplies. You could buy a pair of jeans, a toaster, and a lawn chair in one trip. But behind the counters, trouble brewed. Management wanted growth, and they wanted it fast. Stores were built too quickly. Debt piled up, and worst of all, they handed out credit like candy. Their revolving charge account let customers buy now, pay later, with no real system to check if they could afford it. The trust they gave customers was generous, but fatally blind. W.T. Grant did not just run out of money, it ran out of time. The losses mounted. In 1976, W.T. Grant filed for bankruptcy. It was one of the largest retail collapses in American history. Thousands of workers lost jobs, communities lost familiar storefronts, and shoppers lost a place that felt like home. Unlike other stores that faded quietly, Grant's collapse was loud, public, and painful. It was a warning shot across the bow of American retail. Grow too fast, trust too much, and the walls will fall. People still remember the logo, the way the floors creaked, the smell of new shoes in a cardboard box. But the store itself is gone. There was a time when walking into a Radio Shack and seeing a Tandy computer on display felt like stepping into the future. These were not just machines, they were status symbols. Having one meant your family was ahead of the curve. Tandy was Radio Shack's answer to IBM and Apple, and for a short while, it worked. The price was right, and the software support was decent. Schools even started to adopt them. But this was the 1980s, and the tech world was evolving fast. You could learn basic programming in your bedroom or type out homework assignments that actually looked professional. Tandy helped make personal computing feel possible for everyday families. Tandy tried to do it all. from computers to peripherals to proprietary software, and none of it could keep up with the competition. IBM opened their systems, and Apple got sleek. Meanwhile, Tandy stayed clunky. The name started to feel dated, and the machines began collecting dust. Radio Shack doubled down instead of pulling back. By the 1990s, the computers were gone, and the stores were not far behind. Tandy is one of those names that feels like a ghost now, an echo of when technology was still a little bit magical. The kind of brand you bring up and people say, "Oh yeah, I remember that." Then comes the silence. Pup N Taco was a pretty wonderful place if you were an avid taco lover, and I gotta say, there wasn't as much of that as there should have been in 1956. Hot dogs, tacos, and a variety of flavored slushies meant that it captured a lot of Mexican fans. They were always looking for places that did an authentic mean taco anyway, and now they had found one. Plus, the entire menu was kind of a brave mix of Mexican-style cooking and spices and American comfort foods, which was an idea that wasn't really being explored too much by other places yet. The hybrid menu was one of the first concepts that mixed cuisines like that, and it would become a popular staple format that other places like Del Taco would end up following too. The items were affordable, simple, and varied, which were the keys to making a good fast food place back then anyway. It was meant to be aimed at a younger audience, preferably adults in their 20s who wouldn't have the budget for fancy dining or proper full-course meals but still wanted a bite they could really feel deep in their bones. If you were a teenager in the 1980s, Smash Hits magazine was your Bible. It was where you got your lyrics, your gossip, your posters, and maybe even a little inspiration for your wardrobe. Every issue felt like a backstage pass to the music world. The tone was cheeky, fun, and totally tuned in to what young people cared about. Smash Hits knew its audience and gave them exactly what they wanted. Pop idols, covered, fan letters, printed, band drama, delivered with just enough snark. But then came MTV. Music went visual, fast. By the late 1980s, fans wanted to watch their idols, not just read about them. Video killed the print star. Smash Hits tried to keep up, but the energy was shifting. The American edition could not maintain momentum. Sales declined, competitors emerged, and suddenly, it felt like the magazine was trying too hard to be what it used to be. It lost its spark. The final issues came and went with little fanfare. What once felt like a cultural lifeline became just another magazine you forgot to renew. The posters may still be taped to attic walls somewhere, but the era, that is long gone. Braniff International Airways was not just an airline. It was a fashion show in the sky, a flying work of art with orange planes, purple interiors, and flight attendants dressed by Halston. It was the kind of thing only the 1970s could dream up, and only the 1970s could destroy. It started with color and glamour. People felt like royalty walking onto a Braniff jet, but underneath the paint and press photos was a brutal truth. The airline industry was changing. Gas prices were soaring. Deregulation was coming. Braniff spent money like it was printing it, buying more jets, building grander lounges, and betting big on routes it could not afford. When the economy crashed and fuel costs doubled, Braniff found itself choking on luxury. Passengers stopped flying for style. They wanted cheap. They wanted direct. They wanted reliable. Braniff had become a symbol of excess in a decade no longer willing to pay for it. By the time it folded in 1982, people barely blinked. The planes were grounded, the bright colors faded, and the dream of glamorous air travel took one final nosedive. Ask anyone who flew Braniff in its prime. They will smile, maybe even tear up. Then they will tell you it never stood a chance. The kitchen was the heart of the 1970s home, and Avocado Green was its crown jewel. At least, that is what the designers claimed. Appliances from toasters to refrigerators were coated in this earthy green, a color meant to feel natural and calming. But instead of evoking gardens and freshness, it often made kitchens feel dim, claustrophobic, and permanently stuck in the past. Imagine walking into a kitchen where every appliance matches the color of an overripe avocado. At the time, it felt sleek, stylish. But once that color started to fade or clash with updated counters and cabinets, it became painfully clear that avocado green was never going to age gracefully. What once felt trendy now felt like a permanent bad decision baked into your kitchen. As tastes shifted toward lighter, brighter spaces, avocado green quickly became a design cliché. By the time the 1980s rolled in with its love for chrome and white laminate, avocado green kitchens became the punchline to a joke about bad design choices. Today, they serve as a visual reminder that what is trendy now might become embarrassing later. But green was not the only color we overcommitted to. There was another hue that infiltrated every home and overstayed its welcome, especially underfoot. Miss any of these brands? Tell us in the comments, tap like for the memories, and subscribe for more forgotten stories.